I'm Dr. Nikki, and what I know to be true is the soft life isn't easy to come by, but it is so worth it. Some love and let yourself unfold. Welcome to Dr. Nikki Knows, a channel where we talk about all things related to Black women, mental wellness, sexual wellness, liberation, joy, and of course, pleasure. I'm Dr. Nikki. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that like button. I promise you, this is the place you want to be. So it is Women's History Month. And here at Dr. Nikki Knows, of course, that means it's Black Women's History Month. We're celebrating Black women, all things related to Black womanhood, Black woman identity, all this month. And I had a different plan for what I wanted to talk about for this first episode for the month, but a little Netflix series came out over the weekend and caused all kinds of controversy. So I have to talk about The Soft Life. The show that I'm talking about is With Love, Meghan, and it features Meghan of Sussex. I think that's how you say it. Nay, Meghan Markle. And it's a lifestyle show. It's like a cooking show. It's got that warm, cozy feel, right? It features her living a soft life. When I started watching it, so first of all, let me back up and say, I wouldn't call myself like a Meghan Markle fan, but there's something about her that I find very likable, very alluring. She's interesting to me. I think she is exceptionally compassionate and graceful in her natural way of being that I don't know that I would be if I had lived through some of the same circumstances that she has lived through in the public eye since marrying into the royal family. And so I'm curious about her. I'm interested in her. So I wanted to watch the show. I saw all the foolishness on social media before I even knew there was a show. And so, of course, I went to watch it and I fell in love with it. It reminds me so much of my mother and lots of Southern women that I grew up with. It reminds me of like cotillions and baby showers and bridal showers, anniversary parties. There's just like a level of pomp and circumstance and femininity and attention to detail that I grew up with, quite frankly. I don't know that I have kept the mantle going as much as my mother would have liked, but it felt so familiar to me that I was really confused about people's controversy until I thought about it. Because the reality is, whether she identifies as a Black woman or not, the world perceives her as a Black woman. And I think that folks were running all up into their feelings and experiencing all kind of irritation in their spirit because she is a Black woman that is embodying what we mean when we talk about the soft life. And I am so here for it. I watched that show with so much sense of longing. I watched that show with a sense of admiration. That show was like goals for me. I was like, you know what? I can soften up a little bit more. I can pay attention to details just a little bit more. I have the ability to take my time in my life and do some of that. So I want to talk more in this episode about the soft life. What does it actually mean? What do I think it means versus how it's been sort of packaged and talked about? And then we can sort of get into why I think it's so important to talk about that here in Black Women's History Month. So before we get into what the soft life is or isn't, I think it's really important that we first talk about the strong Black woman schema or strong Black woman identity. The strong Black woman schema is this term that was first introduced in the scholarly literature by Cheryl Woods Giscombe in 2010. The strong Black woman schema is really an evolution of ideas. I would trace it back to Black feminist Patricia Hill Collins' original work, where she talks about controlling images that have been sort of disseminated and instilled across every aspect of American culture with regard to how Black women are able to be perceived. And she used the term controlling images to talk about this notion that there's a stereotype that is promoted with such intensity and such profundity that it actually becomes internalized by Black women themselves. So the strong Black woman schema is this idea that Black women are like ultra resilient, that they are unflappable, that they are capable. It really is a disconnect from the more vulnerable, softer emotions, any sense that Black women would need help or support or care, but that we can inherently sort of do it all on our own. And I like to think about the soft life as a full out rejection of that idea of the strong Black woman. The soft life was originally a term used by Nigerian influencers that came about in the 2020s in saying that they didn't want to be strong anymore. They wanted to live soft, right? This notion that we are tired of being everything to everyone in every way, but leaving so very little for ourselves. And that the price of being constantly responsible and resilient and capable and solving all the problems and unflappable and nurturing and caring, taking care of everyone else is exhausting, right? And so I have talked about the soft life before. In 2022, I was on Kimberly Nicole Foster's YouTube channel and talking about the soft life. And I think about the soft life a little bit differently than the way that I think it has been promoted in the broader social discourse. So much so that I launched a soft life retreat. And when I talk about the soft life, I'm talking about the internalization and the embodiment of four pillars, four key ideas. And they are authenticity, self-compassion, boundaries, and of course, pleasure. I think we could spend a lot of time thinking about how Black women can sort of divest from the controlling image of the strong Black woman, or how do we start to disentangle our own individual identities from the strong Black woman schema. And I argue that that is exceptionally hard when we live in oppressive systems that constantly reinforce our need to be strong and resilient and capable and unflappable. And so obviously as a therapist and coach, I'm always thinking about what is the internal, what is the sort of mental mindset that we need to be shifting so that we can then begin to change our behavior. And then when we change our behavior, the system has to respond accordingly. So let's get into it. Why do I focus on authenticity, self-compassion, boundaries, and pleasure? I'm going to tell you why. So let's start with authenticity. The power of really showing up as your full self. The reality is when Black women show up as our full selves, full of joy and life, bursting with energy, color, spirit, vitality, and energy, oftentimes that behavior is policed, quite frankly, literally. There was a story back in the late 2010s, I believe, in which Black women were on a wine train. They were drinking wine, laughing, having a good time, as was everyone else on the train. But because they were so loud, because they were having so much fun, they were actually kicked off the train. I can tell you countless stories where I have been with other Black women, where I've even been in workplaces and have been told that I am too loud because I am laughing or I'm having too much fun at work, right? So this idea that when you show up as your authentic self, you are perceived through someone else's lens, and that lens usually comes along with some sort of sanction, some type of punitive action, some sort of negative outcome. Black women do a lot of masking day in and day out because it feels easier to present in a way that is more palatable and acceptable in places rather than dealing with the consequences. And what I argue is there is a middle ground. What I argue is that I think we have internalized that notion so much that oftentimes we may be limiting ourselves we may be masking with a level of intensity that is not necessary in the environment that we're in. And in fact, when we do that, we're sort of colluding with the systems that are policing us, that are telling us what's an appropriate and acceptable way to be. Am I naive enough to feel like we can just start showing up as our full selves, especially at work, especially if you are in a leadership position or high ranking position? Absolutely not. What I am saying is, I think it's really important for us in our sense of empowerment to look for all the moments and all the ways that we can stop silencing and ourselves, stop masking ourselves, and start to push back a little bit more on that authenticity. As an example, for me, I was in academia. The vast majority of my career so far was working in Research One institutions. I taught undergraduate, master's, and doctoral level courses. I've done corporate workshops. I do workshop facilitation. And in all those spaces, I make sure to code switch. I make sure that at some point in the conversation, I am speaking from my authentic voice. I'm using AAVE. I'm going to drop an A. I'm going to drop a G off the end of the word. Because when I am in the flow of, when I am in flow of presenting, of teaching, of being present in the moment, I'm speaking in the way in which I think and live. And so I think it's really important that we start to create tension in places so that the world makes more space for us rather than us constantly accommodating the world. So that's why authenticity is number one. Number two is self-compassion. Whew. I always say that my ideal client, my prototypical client, is high achieving, high performing Black women. And I am one. I know you well because I am one myself. And the only way that you have become a high achieving, high performing Black woman is because you have learned to critique yourself before the world can. You were successful in school, you got the bachelor's degree, you went on to get the advanced degree, you have been promoted, you've probably been the youngest to do whatever, you've been the team leader. You are just that person, right? You check all the boxes. And what has happened is, along the way, you've learned to look for all the potential ways that your intelligence, your prowess, your talent, your capabilities, your competence can be undermined. And so you look for those before someone else can do it, and you make sure that there are no cracks at all in the armor. The problem is we then are not able to turn that self-critique off across all parts of our life. It is the function of our brains. Our limbic system, the part of our brain that regulates our sense of threat, that regulates our sense of safety and well-being, always scans for negative. It's scanning for the threat. So that means our brains are already wired to look for the critique, to look for the negative. So if we start to do that with intentionality, it becomes so much harder to stop doing that. And self-compassion is the way that we work ourselves out of being our harshest critic. I tell my clients all the time, stop standing on your own neck. You are so hard on yourselves. Black women are so hard on ourselves. So one of the biggest ways that we can start to really embody and live in a soft life is to be self-compassionate. We know how to be compassionate for other people. We're taught to do that probably from the moment we can start to really form thoughts and be out in the world, right? To be looking out for other people's needs, to be trying to make sure other people are comfortable. And we tend to put ourselves last. And so the self-compassion is simply taking all of that nurturing, that grace, that forgiveness, that giving someone the benefit of the doubt, looking at someone's humanity and turning all of that in to yourself. It is so important. And what I will promise you is the more you practice it, the more you will have a greater understanding of how hard you are on yourself in ways that are really not necessary. So we have authenticity, we have self-compassion, and now we have boundaries. Because here's the thing, when you start showing up as your full self, unapologetically, okay, real, raw, unfiltered, when you are loving yourself, when you are realizing that actually you don't have to go as hard as you thought you did because you've achieved, you've arrived, you've built a really solid foundation. Folks ain't going to like that. Baby, folks are going to hate it. And they might not even tell you directly. They might not even be consciously aware, but they are going to start to react to the fact that you're not reacting to them in the same way. And this is when having boundaries becomes so absolutely important. I always say everybody loves a boundary until they are on the other side of it. Okay? People want to impose boundaries for their lives, but they don't want you imposing boundaries for your life. But it's so critically important. The way that you continue to foster that self-compassion, the way that you continue to have the courage to be able to show up as your authentic self is through having good boundaries. Being really clear on who has access to you and who does not. What are your psychological needs for safety? What are your needs for feeling loved and seen and valued and affirmed? And if folks can't meet that, they got to back up just a little bit, right? They don't get the same access to you as folks who do honor that for you, right? So having the boundaries is your protection. You are worthy of protecting your self-compassion, your authenticity. You are worthy of protecting your softness. And that comes through the practice of boundaries. And I always talk about practice because especially if you are a recovering people pleaser, especially if you are a recovering perfectionist. Hello, hi, me. The boundaries, baby, they sound way easier than they are to enact. And so it is a practice. And so another way that you practice that self-compassion is by practicing giving yourself grace when you don't always uphold your boundaries. And then number 4, my favorite, is pleasure. It's pleasure because listen, if it's not giving pleasure, what's the point? Like if you are doing all of this work on yourself, for yourself, at your job, for the company, for your partner, for your family, for your kids, for your community, for your sorority, for whatever organization you're a member of, for the board, all the people, and you know who you are, you know who I'm talking about. If you're doing all of that and it's not feeding you with enough joy or pleasure, what is the point? You need to change that asaptually. We have to shift that dynamic. Rather than thinking you need to earn pleasure, rather than thinking once you do A, B, C, D, Q, and then you get joy and pleasure, I need you to reverse that, which is why I'm always talking about Black women centering joy and pleasure at the core of their lives. To really lean into practicing, embodying, pursuing, going after the things that bring you pleasure, that make you feel good just for the sake of feeling good. You need to have that. And if you don't know what that is, you need to explore and figure that out. I can actually help you with that. That's why I have developed and created the Pleasure Pursuit. It is a 52-week planner and journal that is designed to help you begin to do the work of prioritizing your pleasure and showing up for the fullest version of yourself with joy, with enthusiasm, with the expansion of your pleasure continuum, the expansion of your understanding of the things that bring you pleasure and joy, and the increasing capacity for holding pleasure. So for me, when I think about a soft life, if you're not starting with those 4 principles, those 4 ideas of authenticity, self-compassion, boundaries, and pleasure, you've already lost. It's not about buying the things. It's not about the facials or the massages or the La Crusade. All of those things are beautiful. And yes, to all those things. I'm all about the luxury, the indulgence. 5 stars, please. Okay? And you have to have the mental mindset first, right? So if any of this sounds like stuff you want to practice more for yourself, that you're like, you know what, Dr. Nikki, I can benefit from some of that. That's what I do. I love working with women around these issues and these stuck points. Love working with women around increasing their ability to and their skills for showing up as their authentic selves with self-compassion and boundaries that get their psychological needs met and experiencing pleasure. You need to book a free consultation with me. Link is in the show notes. You can always find it there. Now, let's get to this week's pleasure practice, okay? This week's pleasure practice is how to begin prioritizing your own pleasure. It's one of the exercises I do with my clients. I want you to think about the next time that you are taking some time out for yourself. And when you are in that moment, whether it's on the couch doing a little Netflix, maybe you're going to watch With Love, Meghan, whether it's to sit down and do a little coloring or just to listen to some good music and have a good glass of something, whatever the thing is for yourself, when you're settling into it, I want you to ask yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable do I feel? Is this a 7? Is this a 5? Right? And I really want you to scan your body. And if you decide that you are like, it's like a 7, I want you to think about what is the thing you need that could take it up to an 8. But to really think about what is the thing that you can just elevate that pleasure, elevate that satisfaction, elevate that comfort for you, even if it's by 1 degree. And I want you to start to think about how many times you diminish your optimal sense of comfort and pleasure and joy by habit. And I want you to start to think about this 1 to 10 scale in other places of your life. How much more comfortable could I be? How much more could I add, or what do I need to take away from this experience to create more space for me to have joy and pleasure? That's your pleasure practice for the week. As always, come back to the episode. Let us know how it went, okay? Let us know. Did your scale go from a 5 to 6, or were you already at 10 and now you at a 10.5? I would love to hear from you about what you thought about this exercise, what you think about the soft life. What's your definition of the soft life? Come back. Let's have a conversation. So here is the Pleasure Pursuit. You can purchase it on my website, www.drnikkiknows.com/shop. And it's available to you. It's ready to go. It's beautiful on the inside. It is a planner and journal designed specifically to help you start to prioritizing pleasure in your life. The Pleasure Pursuit is great for you to do work on your own, to hold yourself self-compassionately accountable in here. You can also work with me one-on-one with coaching. That is part of the soft life, is recognizing that you need help doing some of the things that you can't quite figure out on your own. And that is totally okay. I love doing this work. You can book a free consultation with me anytime. Let's meet. Let's get to know each other. Let's see if we would be good partners to work together. Thank you so much for tuning in to Dr. Nikki Knows. Remember, soft life, abundant pleasure, unapologetically.